Hello and welcome back to Off the Shelf Book Talk with Book People. I'm Elizabeth Nelson here with Kay Johnson, and we know it has been a while since we last recorded, but it has been a year of life happens. It's sort of the motto.
Yeah. Well, in fact, it was a year ago now that I fell down a flight of steps and literally spent the next 3 months convalescing. And so between all that, I moved. I sold my condo. I moved again. We moved my mom. We and as you well know, the Leader closed.
Yes.
So beginning of April, we were notified that the company that owned the newspaper in Litchfield and Hutchinson was closing after 140 some years, which is sort of like, oh my. And then, of course, being over 65, I applied for Medicare, figured I was going to get unemployment, and was all ready to cruise into my into the sunset.
Yeah.
When all of a sudden, all sorts of people started stepping up who were interested in starting a new newspaper or buying the existing ones. And so after much Facebook conversation and different things like that, a company called Cherry Road in New Jersey stepped up, and it's Cherry Road Media and Cherry Road Technology, and they have almost 100 papers. So they have started the Hutchinson Station and the Litchfield Rail, which I think you probably got 4 weeks free initially, and now to receive it you need to subscribe. But it's been a whirlwind because we literally filled out what I thought were hundreds of HR papers while I was writing stories for a paper.
Yeah.
So I was only slightly insane. And our boss, Lee, said, the good news is the first week is the hardest.
Yes.
And it should get easier. So we'll see.
Yep.
So on that note, I haven't read a book in a year, so I have nothing to talk about. Actually, as you probably guessed, is not true because
Yes.
I've read a lot of books.
Yes.
But the one I'm reading right now is one that my good niece Betsy and my sister Jill are reading. And it's Erik Larson's new one.
The Demon of Unrest.
And it's interesting because it takes place in a time period that really hasn't been written about a lot. And it's from Lincoln's election, Abraham Lincoln's election as president, to the start of the Civil War. And that's, a couple years in there, I think?
I think so, yeah.
And although the book does go back and kind of sets the stage for all these things, but if you haven't ever read Erik Larson's work, he writes great books.
I've heard what he writes, people call it faction.
Ah,
It's facts that read as fiction. So he's a nonfiction writer, but he has a way of making it so that it's not so dry or textbooky
Yes.
as some of them can be. And I don't think I've read any of the books of his that I've read I haven't enjoyed.
Oh, I thought they were really good. And this one is really good because he's got kind of a fun sense of humor. And he's throwing in little asides on
Yes,
things that
he does.
are kind of interesting that he didn't necessarily do in the other books.
Yeah.
And he compares, I think he was motivated by the January 6th insurrection
Yes.
is what prompted him to compare it to 1860. And if you follow any of the political discourse that's happening around us, much of what's happening today is very reflective of the 1860 prior to the Civil War.
Yep.
And so it's really kind of an interesting parallel. And in his introduction, he talks about that.
Yeah. The one thing that I've decided it's a very good thing to have a retired military person as a father when reading this book, because if there are things that pop up with the military stuff and I don't understand it, I have literally just taken a picture of the paragraph and I send it to my dad and I'm like, what does this mean? And then I get a nice little paragraph back with it all describing it for me.
Well,
And he was like, what are you reading? And I'm like, I'm reading the new Erik Larson book. And he's like, oh, okay.
so now he'll probably want to read it.
He has asked for it, yes.
It's
Yes.
interesting because her dad, my brother-in-law, is a West Point graduate and was career Army, serving 26 years, 25 years?
25, I think it's 25, I believe.
And so he is our resident military expert.
Yes.
And when he was a veteran services officer, it wasn't unlike me to call him and say, Jim, who's this, or what's this, or how do I do this, and or what does this mean? And he was always good about it. And so the Eric Larson books, I think, like Betsy said, is they're nonfiction. So everything in the book is fact and true. And in his introduction, he tells you that some of the conversations have been created based on letters and
Yeah, he has like a whole format for how he writes things out, and he lets you know, like, oh, I changed the spelling because this person had terrible grammar and didn't know how to spell, and so I made it so you could read it. But if it's word for word, I think they're generally in quotes, I believe.
Yeah,
but,
he it's so amazing though, because what's really fun about this book is there's a good portion of it about Fort Sumter. And when Jim, her dad, my brother-in-law, was stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, my mom and I took a little trip around the South, and we were at Fort Sumter. And so I dug out pictures in my scrapbook because I thought, I think we were there. And there we are.
Yeah.
And it's a national park today. And when you're there, you realize how close everything is to the, because in Charleston, if you've ever been there, the Battery is where these beautiful homes are along the harbor. And I wonder if they had cannons in their front yard.
Probably.
Yeah.
I'm sure a few of them did. But I'm enjoying this. I'm only about maybe a fourth of the way through it, I think. I'm not sure. I think I'm rereading a couple pages because I have a bookmark thief in my house. His name is Archie. He's 3 years old, and he likes to pull the papers out that you use for bookmarks. So I have to find my magnetic bookmarks. So it's like it folds in half, and there's a magnet on each side, so it wraps around the pages, and he can't get his little fingers in there and get those out. But he will go right along in. And I also had to put a lock on my Kindle because he figured out how to go in, and he would sync it, and anything I had that was over, like would do for the library would just go back and be gone. And so I'd log in, and there would be books that were missing, and I'd have no idea where they went, and he'd returned them for me. But I think when I look back at Eric Larson, I think my favorite Eric Larson, I really like Devil in the White City, which is about the World's Fair and H.H. Holmes, one of America's first serial killers. And that's really interesting because was that Chicago?
Yes.
Chicago was where the World's Fair was, and he had his spree at the same time. So it talks about both sides of that. And then I also enjoyed In the Garden of the Beast, which is about the last U.S. ambassador before World War II, which was interesting to see that part. And it always feels like he picks parts of history that are leading up to like the big event. It's the same with the Winston Churchill book that just came out, The Splendid and the Vile.
Yes.
That's is it from when Churchill's
when he becomes
takes over
prime
minister up through the Blitz, right?
It's the same time period as The Darkest Hour,
Okay.
the movie that was out a couple of years ago.
Yeah, so it's fun. I enjoy reading him. I really dislike that. I mean, he's very well researched, and that's great. But because he's well researched, there's space between his books, and I'm always like, I wish he was like some of the pop mystery people that can pop out
every
He
year.
needs to be James Patterson. Get out there and pop him out. But yeah, so I enjoyed that.
The
very much.
interesting about that book too is the one about the devil in
Devil in the White City.
Yeah, Betsy's husband Tom is a self-admitted sort of not unreader.
Yes.
He will start books and then not finish them. And he said he really liked this book, and he read it and finished it.
Yep, he likes Eric Larson. He does like. He's also the only one of his that I found really hard to read was Dead Wake about the Lusitania.
I read that one.
Just because, you know, spoiler alert, the Lusitania sank. It was hit by a U-boat, and that's just kind of hard when you think about all the people on the ship that had to go down. And so that's always the hard part when you're reading something that's nonfiction. You get to like everybody, and you're like, oh, but this is a tragic event, and you're all going to leave me and die, which is hard.
Yeah, it is hard, but it's also
Important.
gives you, I think, a interesting doorway into history
Yes.
that you don't always get.
I remember with the book about Churchill, The Splendid and the Vile, during that history period of time, there were people across England that were taking part in a study where they were keeping journals every day.
Yes, wasn't that
and
interesting?
I hadn't heard about that part of it, and so he had all these firsthand eyewitness accounts of different people in different classes and areas that he could pull on, which I think gives he always finds like the person that's there and involved, but they're not quite in the limelight. So it's sort
Right.
of the
secretaries and
secretary
the
or
janitors
the person
and
that was there but off to the side that didn't
support
have the
personnel.
supporting role type person.
yes, yeah, versus not Churchill, but the people around
People
him.
around him that interacted with him, which is interesting. So
Yeah, I think it's really good. The German one on the garden.
in the Garden of the Beast.
Yes, that one's really interesting too because it's before the war, and so you see the rise of Hitler, and I think it starts out with some Jewish people getting beaten up on the street, isn't it?
Something like that, I believe.
Yeah, I think so, and which apparently was somewhat common at that time in that place, and so, but it's. If you haven't read his books, I encourage you to check them out. I know the library has them. They're available to buy, to get at libraries. If they don't have them, they can order them. But they are well worth.
They more than likely would have them in the Libby app also, which is the ebook version. You can get the ebook or the audiobook.
Yeah, I was
through
just
the
going to say it's
library as
also
well.
an audiobook, I'm sure, and it's highly recommended, and they're all standalone books.
Yes.
So you don't have to read them in any specific order. So if you're interested in World War II, read the Churchill book. If you prefer the Civil War, read this one.
No.
And if you want more American stuff, then Chicago.
Yes.
And I'm trying to blank on what else he's
There's
written.
another one. I can't remember what the name of it was, but there's one about the electrical power lines and that stuff with Tesla and everything.
Oh,
too.
yeah, Tesla, yes.
I'll have to look that up, and I'll get back to you in another episode on what that is. But
Yeah, so if you are a fan of Eric Larson or you end up reading them because of our recommendation, let us know. Send us an email.
let us know what you think of it.
Yeah, because we'd love to know.
Yes.
So what else, kiddo?
Well, what else have I read? Switching it up from fact to fiction. I recently finished, I'm always kind of hesitant when it comes to like the super popular books that are out there right now, but let me double check who was. Harper Collins had a pretty interesting campaign for this book that recently came out, and this is Matthew Blake's Anna O.
Okay.
So, so it was really interesting. So the story is, it starts out with a psychologist who works with patients with sleep disorders at a sleep clinic. And he is called in one night by his boss and has been brought in to help out with what is called the Anna O case. Now, Anna O was the daughter of, I believe her father is like a money manager and her mom was high up in the government. It takes place in London.
Fiction?
Fiction.
Okay.
Yep. So, and Anna has been asleep for the last 4 years, unable to be awoken, following her possibly murdering her 2 coworkers.
Well, there you go.
So no one's been able to wake her up, and they're getting to the point now where they need her to wake up so they can either prosecute her, or if she's not waking up, they have to
Like pull the
let
plug?
her go. Well, she's fine. Like her brain is working fine.
So she's not on a respirator.
She's not on a respirator or anything. She's just asleep and can't be woken up. So they refer to her, the people that think she was the murderer call her Anna O, and the people who think she's just innocent call her Sleeping Beauty.
Okay.
because it's the sleep disorder where she doesn't wake up, and the doctor's name is Dr. Prince. So that becomes a big thing with the Prince waking Sleeping Beauty. So you're reading through the whole book, and there are Dr. Prince is trying to figure out what actually happened and trying to wake her up. And then you have journal entries from Anna's journal leading up to the event, and them trying to figure out what the whole deal is. And so when HarperCollins was doing the publicity for the book, they had different posters that they had at the different booksellers, and then people would use, like, it was a white book cover or a black book cover, and then based on if you thought she was innocent, white, or guilty, black, the different people that read it would hold up the different different booksellers who had read it would hold up what they thought, if she actually got away with it or what it was. And I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it kind of leaves you thinking until you get to the end and it all comes together and wraps it up. Because there were a few times I was a little confused because I'm like, I don't know anything about sleep disorders or anything like that except for really crazy dreams for myself, which you kind of wake up and you're like, where did that come from? But it's an easy read. I read it in maybe 2-3 days, depending on, and that was another one that I think I read a few chapters over from the book Marked Thief. But very interesting. I did appreciate, I kind of thought when I got to one point in the book that was how it was going to end, but then they kind of twisted it so you kind of doubted yourself that you had figured it out. And then you get to the end and you were like, I was right. But I did enjoy it. It's a quick one. I think it might, I don't think it was a, I was going to say, I think it was a Reese Witherspoon pick, but I don't think it was now that I think about it. I think there was a different one that she picked for that month. But
did you recommend it?
I do, yes.
Is it one people can get at the library?
I would assume so. I picked up mine, I think, at Target because I needed something to read, so I just grabbed it and walked out the door. Or I paid for it, I promise. But I did take it home that way. But I would assume it's at the library. It's I think it came out in February or March, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
So, yes, a lot of books that are coming out right now that are either series coming to a close or new things that will be starting.
Maggie Hope comes to mind.
Yes, her book came out May 14th. It came out this week.
Did you get it?
I have not yet.
That's self-control. Wow.
I have a problem with book series that I get really invested in. When it gets to, like, I know it's the last book in the series, it takes me a lot longer to, like, actually pick it up and read it because I know it's goodbye. I know it's saying goodbye to people that, you know, they're fictional, and I know that in my head, but when you've read, I think there's 7 or 9 books in this.
This is the ninth one.
So you've invested 8 books with these people that you feel like you know everybody and they're your friends. And I have this happen with a lot of book series, as we have talked about over the years, that you get to know them and you're comfortable with them and you don't really want to.
Why is she doing this?
She's going to be starting a new series. I think there's another. So the author of the Maggie Hope books is Susan Elias McNeil, and the first Maggie Hope book is Mr. Churchill's Secretary. And these books, for those who aren't familiar, Maggie Hope is a dual citizen between the United States and Great Britain, and she goes back to London right before the start of World War II. Yes, to her grandmother passes away, and she goes to handle the house.
It's the state.
Yes, and then from there proceeds to work for Winston Churchill and become a very interesting woman with how she is able to contribute to the war effort. And it's great, actually, because, again, this is another part of history that doesn't get covered a lot. Women like Maggie who were part of
the war
spying
effort.
And the war effort and all of that. And
sort of the unsung heroes.
Yes. And so, but the new one coming out is The Last Hope. So, which is very
literally.
The Last Hope is the name of the book, and it's our last Maggie Hope book. So I do plan on getting it soon.
There's a lot of ups and downs in the books, and it's I have not read them all, so I can't speak to.
I have read them all, and sometimes not always enjoyed them because some of the subject matter, it's that time in history and they're in Europe and she's going into Germany and the different places. And but it's interesting when they bring in the real life people. Like I think in this book, the last book, I believe she's going back to Germany with Coco Chanel.
Yes, that's
Yes.
who. And
So-
at the time, they don't know if she's a double agent.
Coco Chanel.
Yeah,
Yes.
not Maggie Hope.
Yes.
And but Maggie's completely fictional, where Chanel is real.
Yes. But what else have you been reading?
Well, this one I think I want to mention because it was Hutchinson's one community selection for this year. And in April, the author, Matt Goldman, was in Hutchinson and gave a talk about the book and his career because he's an award-winning TV writer, as well as a book writer, as well as playwright, I think, too. So he's done a lot of stuff. But this book I thought was particularly interesting because it's an interesting approach because it starts out where a son is going home to kind of help his mom take care of his dad because his dad has dementia. And if you've dealt with anyone who has early onset Alzheimer's or dementia, they seem to have excellent recall years ago and no short-term memory.
Yeah.
And in this book, Dad has a remarkable long-term memory, and he starts talking about things that happened a long time ago, and in turn, the son gets involved, and was there a murder? Wasn't there a murder? Who was murdered? What happened? And so I thought it was a really interesting twist on, a different approach to mysteries because, personally, I could probably use 50, 60 different ways to kill people if I so choose.
Miss Agatha Christie for your consideration.
Yeah, that's about it. And so it's always fun when you find a unique one because so often they're traditional, hit by a car, poisoned, shot, stabbed, electrocuted. Take your pick.
Find something interesting.
Yeah, so this was interesting, although the murder itself is sort of straightforward. It's the
everything around it.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting, and so I recommend if you read it as part of One Book, One Community, great. If you haven't read it and you're looking for a summer quick read, it's available at the library, and I recommend it.
Okay.
So what else have you read, Elizabeth?
Let's see.
I know we have to check the phone because
I know it's my Goodreads is my life. I took a break from regular books and I had to check in with my graphic novel series that I'm working my way through. I've read talk about a couple of these over the time, but there is a podcast called The Adventure Zone, which is done by a family by the last name of McElroy. And the podcast is a father and his 3 sons playing their way through different Dungeons and Dragons campaigns that the brothers take turns running.
Okay.
And so their very first one when they started the podcast was called The Bureau of Balance, was what they named all the episodes. And so they are now releasing graphic novels for each arc that they did where they were battling monsters and crazy things happened. And so the newest one was called The 11th Hour. And I read that one, and it's always entertaining to go. And then, so because I reread them, then I've started going back and re-listening to the podcast, and it's a little memory for me. But my son Alex has started getting into graphic novels through the library at school, so he's brought home a bunch that are like Star Wars and Sonic the Hedgehog and Batman and all these ones, and so I have to keep my brain afresh of how to read through them. So that was a good help for that too, but it's been interesting to see what a 7-year-old wants to read. One thing we read that I read growing up and you guys read it, I recently finished the Homer Price book.
Oh, I love Homer Price. You have my Homer Price book.
I have the Homer Price book. And
they were scholastic books that you could buy.
Yep, and so Homer lives in this little town of Centerburg. And with very interesting people that he lives with. And it just is, They're short stories that talk about different things that happen in this town, whether it's Ramona the skunk catching bank robbers, or the donut machine that won't turn off,
and the woman diamond ring,
yep,
right?
with the diamond ring that goes in it, or the guy that gets drunk on 100-year-old cough syrup that he found while putting up street signs. But they're very cute, and I hadn't read them in a long time, and he really seemed to enjoy them too. So it's a lot of fun to have stuff that I read, that you and Mom read, that
the
he
third
still
generation.
loves. Yes, and so it's so special for me to have that.
So have you introduced them to the three investigators
I have
yet?
not done that yet. We have them all, but we don't have them all. We have a portion of them. I keep wanting to go on and find the rest of them to complete the series.
They're really expensive.
I know.
They're books that were put out in, I don't know, the 60s, I think.
Okay.
And they're with Alfred Hitchcock.
They're called the Three Investigators, Jupiter Jones and the Three Investigators. And so it's Jupiter Jones, Pete Crenshaw, and Bob Andrews are the three guys that go around, and they're solving mysteries.
And they're teenagers, and Jupiter Jones lives with his aunt and uncle who run a salvage yard. And so with all the stuff that's there, they were able to construct a kind of a secret fort in the midst of all this with a couple different exits. So they will meet there when there's different things going on. And Jupiter was a child actor. And so he has a relationship with Alfred Hitchcock.
Yes.
And
is what the story is. And then Alfred then types up all the stories that he hears about what the boys have been up to.
Yeah, and so I don't even know how many there are, 20, I don't know, but I had some, and Betsy confiscated them.
No, I was reading them, and then they stayed with me. And they now have a place of honor on my shelf.
And they're great books, and I can't wait till Alex reads them because he's going to love them.
He is.
And then the other collection Betsy has that she bought for her boys is Harry Potter.
Yes, I bought a new copy of all the Harry Potter books for when they are old enough to
Did you get two
join.
sets?
No, I have one paperback. Archie is 3. I have time.
Well, I don't know. He's pretty precocious, Betsy.
He is pretty precocious. He does enjoy reciting what he has listened to as he flips the pages of the books, which has been interesting. And on that, we've reached the end of our time for this week. So we're going to wrap it up here. But if you've read anything that we've talked about or have anything you think we should reach, please reach out, Please reach out on Facebook or our email at offtheshelfbooktalk@gmail.com, and we will see you next time.